My name is Christina Lisk. I am 32 years old. I am from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I am here today to tell you about my journey with Nutcracker Syndrome and the subsequent fallout, pelvic congestion syndrome. I've never been in the greatest of health, to put it kindly. I've literally lived with chronic illness in one way or another since I was 6 months old. I started getting chronic ear infections back then. My eardrum just kept re-rupturing and re-rupturing with different infections. They tried 3 sets of tubes. It didn't work. Lost the eardrum altogether in this ear, and it resulted in a non-cancerous tumor. 1 surgery to fix this ear. 4 surgeries to fix this ear after the non-cancerous tumor was removed, and then the tonsillectomy. By the time I had gotten diagnosed with Nutcracker syndrome, I already had 10 surgeries, multiple rounds with anaphylaxis, intermittent ER visits because of various forms of migraine, Lyme disease, hidradenitis suppurativa, severe cystic acne, PCOS, a couple of problems with mental health. Surprise, surprise, after dealing with that much physical illness. Chronic illness was nothing new to me by the time I had gotten diagnosed with Nutcracker syndrome, but what was new was the diagnosis in and of itself. I had lived for at least 8 to 10 years with severe pelvic pain and severe pelvic floor cramping. When I was younger, I was chronically ill, and one of the things I learned the hard way and very fast, it's not about what you can and can't do, it's about learning new ways to do things and the people who uplift you along the way. When I recovered from surgery, I developed my passion for writing because my brain and body would be in this limbo where my head would be super active, but if I went out of the house for 1 hour, I was so tired that I'd have to sleep for 3. So I wrote and wrote and wrote. And my high school theater teacher always read my stories and my work once it was finished. She too dealt with chronic illness, so she understood exactly what I was going through. But she was the only one I had in my world who really got it. For everyone else, being young and sick, it was a foreign combination. I was left to figure out a lot of things on my own. I know people did the best they could with what they had at the time, but it did result in some painful situations. I've done my best to try and take what I've learned in those instances to build something better for the next generation. And part of why I want to talk about Nutcracker syndrome is that building something better means raising awareness for illnesses that are much less known. Barely anybody knew what Nutcracker syndrome was. I hardly knew what Nutcracker syndrome was when I got diagnosed with it. With the pelvic pain and all the symptoms I was having, everybody was pushing, you have endometriosis, but that can only be diagnosed through surgery. After growing up sickly and having 10 surgeries, I was not going back in the OR again unless somebody could guarantee a result coming out of it. Maybe was not enough. By chance, when they found pelvic congestion, which is varicose veins of the uterus and the ovaries, they were all saying endo was the cause, but I was like, if endo isn't the cause, what else could it be? And people were saying, well, it could also be a vascular disorder. And I thought to myself, let's get this checked out first, because we can check it out non-surgically. We don't need to go in laparoscopically with a big camera to figure it out. Someone can do an ultrasound or a CT scan. And if I can eliminate those things that way, I can at least go into surgery and know something will come out. Part of why I had so many surgical repairs was because the architecture of the eardrum kept falling and getting blown out. The tissue in my ear just wasn't strong enough to stand up against the infections, and failed surgery, that was devastating. It was my fear of failed surgery that really caused me to stay away from just jumping under the gynecologist's knife to have endometriosis surgery. Medical gaslighting is nothing new to me. I have dealt with it in multiple forms my entire life. In the case of Nutcracker syndrome, a lot of people would tell me that it was just stress, or if I was bleeding heavily, it's just stress, you're just upset about something. Or people would assume I was faking to get out of working or making excuses because I was afraid of my quote quote-unquote true potential. And it got to the point where after a while, I just let them believe what they wanted to believe, because trying to fight with them about it was too hard. Even though the pain was escalating every single day, the cramps were kicking up, the bleeding was becoming more unpredictable, the pain was spreading all up my abdomen and all up my back, everyone just kept telling me, if they did even believe there was a diagnosis, it was, well, it's just endo and you're just being weak about getting this surgery. And again, I stuck by, I'm not having surgery without a guaranteed result. And then the intern response was, well, then it really mustn't be that bad. It was bad enough that for the fatigue, I was drinking 4 shots of espresso a day at 75 milligrams of caffeine each, and chasing it with either 600 or even 1,000 milligrams of Elite per day. And yes, there were gastrointestinal consequences. And yes, they were scary. I got to the point where I just felt like I had to muscle through and push myself super, super hard just to be believed. Only when I went to stay with a friend and her family over the past summer did I finally get motivation to really seek some help. I thought everybody was just gonna push me into a surgery with no guaranteed result or tell me that it was all in my head, but my friend and her mom, they both said to me, no, you're really suffering. It was to the point where if I was doing particular activities with them, her mom would actually pull me back and say, no, you need to sit down. You are not healthy enough to do this. By the middle of the summer, I was bedbound. I could barely get out of my pajamas. I was only showering every 4 or so days. And when the pain got that severe, my friend and her mom said to me, we will help you get to the doctor. Whatever it is you need us to do, we will do. They helped me get to the hospitals in the University of Pennsylvania healthcare system, and that's where I found doctors who believed me, who respected me. They heard about my surgical history, and when I said to them, I am conservative when it comes to surgical approaches, I don't want to do this again if I don't have to, they immediately understood and said, we will do whatever we have to make sure you don't need to go into surgery unnecessarily. My first gynecologist at Penn, she was spectacular. She said to me, we will try these scans right here, even though they're less likely to find certain pieces of evidence than a surgical procedure. It's not impossible. And if they show anything on there, then we know for sure that you have it and you're doing the right thing. And when I asked her, are there other causes to pelvic congestion? She said, yeah, they're vascular, or sometimes they're vascular. So she inspired me to call the vascular surgeon within the UPenn healthcare system. I admit my surgeon was inclined to think endometriosis at first, but I said to him, I know it's probably endo, but I just want to get things checked out so I don't have to have surgery. He ordered an ovarian vein reflux ultrasound. That's different than the typical transvaginal and pelvic ultrasound, because instead of going inward, it goes all along the abdomen from the top of your hip up to your rib cage to showcase the ovarian vein. And when they did that with my ovarian vein, they found that it was flooded from compression of the renal vein. Nutcracker syndrome, as I'm going to show through this demonstrative aid, is when the renal vein gets compressed between the superior mesenteric artery, that's the green straw, and the abdominal aorta, that's the blue straw. The idea is that when you compress that vein, in cases where it causes pelvic congestion syndrome, it floods into the ovarian vein, which then pours lots of blood into the veins all around the uterus and ovaries. The effects of this can be displayed by blowing bubbles like this. See how much it's bubbling right here. Now imagine that in the pelvic region. Do you want that kind of stabbing and stinging and bubbling all in that area? I don't think so. He was very surprised to see what was going on. He thought with a number of pelvic symptoms that it wasn't going to be there, but he and I shared that surprise together. We both said, we thought this was going to be easy. We thought this was going to be a quick in and out. I was suffering from a daily general ache of pelvic pain that ranged anywhere from a 2 to a 4, give or take, depending on the activity that I was doing. There were instances where it would just zing up to a 6 or an 8, and it would feel like I was getting shanked by my own uterus. It was like stabbing, dullness, and throbbing all together, and the worse the compression got, the more I felt it go up my body. I even had an instance where I distinctly remember J-shaped pain going up my abdomen. I was throwing up, I was shaking. We thought I was having ovarian torsion at the time, but when we got the ultrasound done in the ER, nothing showed up. The best we could say was maybe it was an ovarian cyst that was small, but no one could put together a real explanation. The only things we had indicating Nutcracker Syndrome and pelvic congestion syndrome were one, ultrasound, because this particular incident happened in 2018 with a J-shaped pain where I was throwing up and in the ER. The one instance or indicator we had was a singular ultrasound that showed a varicose vein. My GP tried to get me to see someone for it, and when I did, she said, oh, it's nothing. Those varicose veins just happen. In 2020, when the pain was getting so severe that I was struggling to move, that's when they found pelvic congestion syndrome. It would take them another years before they found the pelvic congestion was caused by the Nutcracker syndrome. And that's how it is with a lot of us. There are plenty of us living with chronic illness who end up medical enigmas. But a wise friend of mine who introduced me to various elements of the chronic illness world, she told me something very true. Where there's one, there's three, and the other two haven't been diagnosed yet. Chronic illness rarely travels alone. If one thing's going off, chances are several other things are going off with it. And that's what I found to be especially true after having an ovarian vein transposition. Getting back to the demonstrative aid, the idea with the ovarian vein transposition is that we're going to pretend this straw right here is the inferior vena cava. And the idea is that we take the ovarian vein that's currently refluxed and carrying too much blood away from the ovary and swing it to the inferior vena cava. The idea is that the inferior vena cava can better handle the blood flow that's coming through that vein, thereby helping to relieve some of the compression. Sometimes this is done with the iliac vein, but they found a mild compression of the iliac vein with me, so obviously we couldn't do it there. By the time I had the ovarian vein transposition done, my left renal vein was compressed at 80%. That's a severe compression. I am doing a lot better today. I had the ovarian vein transposition done on November 30th, 2023. It was 5 days in the hospital, and they were interesting, to say the least. But I did notice right out of surgery, I did not have the pelvic pain that I had before. The worst part about it was the abdominal incision. Now, that thing hurt like hell the first few days just getting out of bed. That is some of the worst pain I've experienced in my life. And after having extensive eardrum repair surgery, anything around my head, that's saying something if it really hurts. But what I found was that with all that pressure taken off the area, with some clips added in there to help with some of the veins that got too stretched out, I'm feeling a lot better. And a surprising effect was that my migraines disappeared. All but disappeared. Maybe I'll have a twinge of a headache here and there. But for the most part, any problems I've had with my head are gone. Now, I know it's easy to say, oh, it's just the caffeine, you're feeling better without the caffeine. I'm still drinking some caffeine, not the way I was before, just a little bit. But there are other triggers of mine that I've dealt with post-operatively too, and I've never, ever gotten a migraine since. I've eaten 3 sweets in a single day, and sugar used to give me migraines like no one's business. I've had some nights where I haven't been able to sleep. I've been able to go out just fine the next day. Just fine, relatively speaking, with all the post-op troubles. And sadly, I got my heart badly broken right before I went into surgery. The last time that happened, I was getting at least 3 migraines a week and struggling to function. The fact that I was dealing with serious heartbreak and surgery at the same time, and I wasn't getting a migraine, that tells you something right there. My vascular surgeon and my neurologist and my gynecologist all came back to the same conclusion. I was really struggling under the weight of the pain. The neurologist in particular said, you probably aren't having migraines anymore because you're not collapsing under the weight of chronic pain. The gynecologist noted too that a lot of her patients with chronic pelvic pain, they have problems with chronic migraines because the pain is so bad the body can't handle the stress of it. And so the slightest stressor or the slightest trigger will start to shut the body down. The slightest little thing, and then you're in more pain than you were before because you just can't handle it. I am telling people my story as best as I possibly can. Before I got too sick to function in a lot of ways, I was doing a lot of writing. I've been published on The Mighty and on HearingLikeMe.com. I have written for disability nonprofits such as Respectability. I've also given interviews on Disabled Life, both as an interviewee and an interviewer. I do my best to keep the public as educated as possible about life with chronic illness, and Nutcracker Syndrome, it's just a new part of the journey within giving people an education. But I feel like one of my most important lessons with this surgery, it's one that's not talked about very often when we talk about chronic illness stories. My experience within vascular surgery has been that it's not always about whether or not the function is perfect. It's about how you feel. Because by the time you're having vascular surgery, you've reached the point where you can't function anymore. It's not about having the perfect architecture. It's about getting your body to a space where you can get out of bed. You can do the things that you want to do. When you go into surgery, there's this magical story, so to speak, that you go in, you get the surgery done, you're no longer sick, you'll never get sick again, it'll be a happily ever after. But that's not always how it works. Because with the ovarian vein transposition, it's had some additional difficulties. It did not stay quite as open as we expected. There is still a partial occlusion around the ovarian vein, but there is enough that the compression within the kidney, it's been easier to manage. All that blood flow has been taken away from the worst of the veins in the pelvic region, so the pain's not the way it used to be. Some of the muscular structure has been altered because of the constant compensating in different positions, but that's what physical therapy is for. And when I was told the structure wasn't perfect, I initially freaked out, thinking, what did I do this surgery for? Why did I bother to do all of this? And all my doctors came back to the same conclusion. Because you were in pain. Because you were miserable. Because you had to do something, or the quality of life was only going to go down. And that when it comes to surgery, your quality of life matters more than whether or not you suddenly become perfectly able-bodied, or whether or not you have that miracle moment. One of the best things that I've come out of with vascular surgery is knowing that on a medical level and a social level, it's important to embrace different types of bodies. Within the social model of disability, we talk about the idea that society is disabling. And within the medical model, we talk about the idea of the body being disabling. And while both parts hold truth in different ways, it's rare to see the two of them really come together. And I felt like I got to experience a blend of those two with vascular surgery, where the doctors were saying to me, it's not about whether or not your body is considered the perfect body, or you're perfectly cured or perfectly healed. It's about whether or not your body is able to serve and support you. Your body does not need to be perfect for you to be happy. And if something happens with your body that makes it not perfect or keeps things from going to plan, that's not your fault. Sometimes it just happens because of how you're made. And that's okay. As long as you're able to thrive in the body that you have, as long as you live with managed symptoms and you can do the things that are most important to you, then that's enough.